Welcome back, everyone, for our deep dive. We always like to pick a good book to really kind of dig into. And today's no different. We're going to be talking about Trust Me, I'm Lying by Ryan Holiday.
Oh, yeah.
Now, if you haven't heard of this book, this is a really, really wild look at online media and how it's manipulated. And the really interesting thing is that Holiday was actually someone who did the manipulating.
Yeah.
So he's kind of giving us all the secrets and the cheat codes from the inside out.
Yeah, and that's what makes it so compelling, right? It's not just theoretical. He was in the trenches.
Yeah.
He was engineering this unreality, this kind of fake news environment. So when we read his book, we're really getting the blueprint of how this stuff actually works.
Yeah, and it's not like we're trying to give you guys, the cheat codes to go out and do this yourself. This is all about, forewarned is forearmed. We want to help you spot this stuff
Right.
and make sure that you're not being played.
Exactly.
So, okay, one of the first things that Holiday really unpacks in this book is this idea of the news funnel.
Hmm.
And it's kind of this, you can picture this funnel and only like a tiny little bit of everything that's actually happening out in the world even makes it through that funnel.
Yeah.
To us, the stuff that we see online.
Yeah. It's a very, very small percentage.
Right. And then even the stuff that makes it through
Right.
is chosen for very specific reasons.
Of course, because it has to be, eye-catching or what they call clickable, right?
Right.
So it has to appeal to those kind of primal instincts.
Yeah.
The things that make us, angry or afraid,
Right.
because that's what gets our attention.
It's not necessarily even what's important. It's just what's going to get the most attention.
Exactly. And, our brains are hardwired for that, right? Like we prioritize threats. It's a survival mechanism.
Yeah.
So it's not surprising that that's what gets amplified in the media environment.
So it's not like they're necessarily trying to be malicious. It's just good business.
Right.
That's the way it works. Okay, so speaking of good business, one of the things that I found just absolutely fascinating and a little terrifying is his whole strategy of what he calls trading up the chain,
Yeah.
where he basically lays out how he manufactured controversy, starting small and riding that wave to mainstream media.
Right. It's like this kind of bottom-up approach to media manipulation.
Okay, so give us an example. How did this actually work in practice?
Well, he talks about his work with Tucker Max,
Okay.
the author,
Mm-hmm.
and he basically orchestrated these kind of grassroots protests against Max's book.
Really?
Yeah, like they even went so far as to vandalize billboards to get attention,
Oh, wow.
create this kind of sense of outrage.
So this was all like planned. It was meant to look like it was organic and it was just people.
Exactly. It was all very calculated.
Wow.
And the craziest part is it worked.
Really?
It sparked all this controversy, got people talking, and before you know, it snowballed into major news coverage.
So he was basically manipulating the mainstream media by creating these fake grassroots things that then they would pick up on because it looks like it's, some
Right.
kind of movement.
Yeah, because that's what's newsworthy,
Right.
right? It's not newsworthy if it's just like some publicist putting out a press release.
Right.
It's newsworthy if it seems like it's bubbling up from the ground, like it's this organic.
Like people are really upset about this, so it must be important.
Exactly. And that's how he was able to game the system.
And he says this wasn't like a one-off. He said this worked time and time again.
Yeah, he claims that this was a strategy that he used repeatedly.
That's wild. It makes you realize how much of what we see online is just orchestrated. It's like, how do you even know what's real anymore? How do you separate truth from fiction when it's all,
Right, when the lines are so blurred.
Exactly.
And that's really, I think, the central question that Holiday wants us to wrestle with,
Yeah.
is how do we navigate this environment
Right.
where truth is so elusive?
Right. And I think one of the key insights that he has is that a lot of this comes down to the fact that, blogs are businesses.
Of course.
It's not, they're not these like, bastions of, journalistic integrity.
Right, they're not public services.
Right.
They are businesses with a bottom line, and they have to answer to advertisers.
Yeah. And the product is us.
Exactly.
The readers,
Attention.
our attention, it's right. Our attention is the product that's being sold.
Right.
So in this attention economy, clicks are king.
Exactly. The more clicks, the more ad revenue.
The more money.
Right.
So they're going to prioritize content that gets those clicks.
Absolutely.
Regardless of whether it's true, whether it's accurate, whether it's,
Right. It doesn't matter if it's nuanced or fair or balanced.
Right.
It's just, does it get
It
clicked?
can get clicks. And I think that really feeds into this other thing that he talks about, which is the one-off problem.
Yes.
Where blogs need something new every single day, even every hour.
Right. There's this constant churn of content. this insatiable appetite for novelty.
So it's almost like, remember that game telephone we used to play as kids?
Yeah.
Where you whisper something around the circle,
Right.
and by the time it gets all the way around,
It's totally different.
it's totally different.
Right.
This is like that, but on steroids.
Yeah. And the stakes are much higher.
Right.
Because we're not just talking about, misheard whispers.
Mm.
We're talking about misinformation
Yeah.
that can have real-world consequences.
Yeah. So think about how often you see an article that's based on a single tweet
Yes.
or like a rumor that somebody heard.
Right, or a leaked document that may or may not be authentic.
Right.
And that's the one-off problem in action.
Exactly. And then by the time the correction comes out, if it even comes out,
Right.
the damage is already done.
Exactly. People have moved on.
Right. Nobody's reading the corrections.
No one's going back to read the update.
Yeah.
It's like that old saying, right? A lie can travel halfway around the world while the truth is still putting on its shoes.
Right. Exactly. And it's not even just, fake news or like outright lies that we have to worry about.
Right.
He argues that even just the structure of online media, this constant pressure to be first,
Right.
creates breeding ground for manipulation.
It breeds this kind of carelessness.
Yeah. And this is what he calls the illusion of exclusives.
Yeah. Everyone wants to be the one to break the story,
Right.
to have that scoop,
Yeah.
even if it means cutting corners or, maybe not vetting their sources as thoroughly as they should.
Right. Or even publishing something that they have some doubts about.
Exactly, because the fear is that if they don't publish it, someone else will.
Right.
And then they'll lose out on those clicks.
He gives that crazy example of the fake iPhone delay.
Oh, yeah.
Where there was this rumor that got started that the iPhone was going to be delayed,
Mhm.
and it wiped billions of dollars off of Apple's stock.
Right.
Just from a completely made-up rumor.
And that's the power of the illusion of exclusives.
Yeah, it's like nobody wants to be left holding the truth when they could be the one who throws the next bombshell.
Exactly. It's like a game of hot potato with information, and no one wants to be the last one holding it.
And this need for speed, this obsession with being first, also feeds into what he calls iterative journalism.
Yeah, which is a fancy way of saying they're basically making it up as they go along.
Right. It's like they're building the plane while they're flying it.
Exactly.
So it's less about getting the whole story right from the get-go and more about just like throwing stuff against the wall and seeing what sticks.
Right, and then constantly updating and revising as new information emerges, which, on the surface sounds like a good thing, right?
Yeah.
Like, oh, they're correcting their mistakes. But the problem is not everyone sees those updates and corrections. And so the initial narrative, even if it's wrong, it takes root.
And it's hard to keep up.
It really is.
Right. Because it's like,
It's exhausting.
it's exhausting to try to keep up with all these corrections and updates. And it's like, you read one thing and then you read another and it's like, well, which one is it?
Right, and so it creates this sense of confusion and distrust.
Yeah. And I think, we have to acknowledge here, we're not exactly innocent bystanders in all of this.
Of course not.
Right? We click, we share, we
crave that novelty. We crave the outrage.
We do. We crave that outrage. Yeah. And that's what makes all of this stuff spread so quickly.
Exactly. We are active participants, whether we realize it or not.
Right. And that's where I think Holliday's book is so important because he's not just pointing fingers at the bloggers and the media.
Right.
He's saying, hey, look in the mirror.
We're all part of this ecosystem.
We're all part of this system and we all have a role to play in either perpetuating it
or changing it.
or changing it. And so that's what we really want to get into, is
Okay.
how do we understand our own role in this and what can we do to actually start to change it?
Right, because it's not enough to just be aware of the problem we have to be actively working towards a solution.
Right. Exactly. And that's where things get really interesting because, as Holliday points out, it's not just a few rogue bloggers who are playing this game.
Right.
There are much bigger forces at work here.
Much more insidious forces who are using these same tactics to shape public opinion.
Right. And control the narrative. And that's something that we really need to be aware of.
Absolutely. And we'll delve into that more after the break. And what's really scary is that some of these forces are playing for keeps. Holliday talks about how bloggers can hold businesses hostage.
Yeah, like threatening to release damaging information.
Right, exactly. Like there was this one case where this blogger was basically extorting a startup.
Really?
Yeah, he was threatening to publish all these negative articles about them.
Unless they paid him off.
Basically, unless they gave him some kind of special treatment.
Wow, that's wild.
And the crazy thing is, it worked.
So it's like the Wild West out there, but instead of gunslingers, it's bloggers.
Exactly. It's all about who has the most dirt and who's willing to use it.
And it's not even just about like silencing your enemies or your critics.
Right.
Holiday even talks about how he helped a friend get like a $500,000 settlement.
Oh, yeah, by threatening a fake lawsuit.
A fake lawsuit.
Yeah, they basically just made it seem like this massive lawsuit was about to be filed.
And it was all just a bluff.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
But the threat alone was enough to force a settlement.
That's insane. And this was all amplified by the blogosphere, right?
Oh, yeah, of course.
Like they got the bloggers to write about it and make it seem like a bigger deal.
Exactly. And that's the power of this echo chamber. You know,
Right.
once something gets picked up and amplified.
It takes on a life of its own.
Exactly.
So, it's just wild to think that people are, making money off of this.
Oh, yeah.
Off of creating this kind of drama and this,
Chaos and fear.
Yeah.
It's a very cynical business model.
And it makes you wonder how much of what we read is actually genuine reporting and how much is just manufactured drama.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Right. Because if people are willing to do this for money, just imagine what they're willing to do to influence
Right.
like political debates or even elections.
Exactly. Because it's not just about money anymore. It's about power.
Right. And Holiday talks about how these same tactics are being used to shape public opinion on a much larger scale.
Oh, absolutely. This is information warfare.
That's like a whole new battleground.
Exactly. And the weapons are things like speed and sensationalism and outrage.
And it's so hard to fight back against because by the time, you see something and you're like, wait a minute, that doesn't seem right.
Right.
It's already gone viral.
Exactly. The damage is done.
People have already made up their minds.
And the people who are behind this stuff, they understand that.
So it's almost like they're weaponizing our own psychology against us.
Exactly. They're exploiting our natural tendencies to prioritize threats and to react emotionally to information.
And in this environment where it's all about being first to break the news,
Right.
is there even space for nuance?
That's a good question. And it's one that Holiday grapples with in the book.
Right, because it seems like if you're trying to be nuanced or you're trying to be, thoughtful, and you're like, well, let me get all the facts and let me make sure I'm being fair.
You're already behind.
You've already lost.
Right. And the news cycle has moved on.
And I think this also ties into this whole culture of snark that we see online.
Well, yeah.
Where it's like, if you can't say something nice.
See that sarcastically?
Exactly.
Preferably with a meme attached.
Right. And Holiday argues that while this might seem harmless on the surface,
Right.
it can actually be really destructive.
Absolutely. Because it shuts down meaningful conversation.
Right. Because who wants to engage in a debate
Exactly.
when you're just going to get mocked and ridiculed?
Right. And so it creates this environment where the only voices that are heard are the ones that are the most extreme or the most
outrageous,
right.
Or the ones that are just like, going along with the joke.
Exactly. And that's not a recipe for a healthy public discourse.
And he gives this really interesting example of Scott Adams.
Oh, yeah, the Dilbert creator.
Yeah, who was a really prolific blogger for a while.
He was.
But he ended up quitting because he was just burned out by all the negativity.
Yeah, he couldn't take the constant attacks and the criticism.
And it just makes you wonder how many other voices have been silenced because of this kind of online cruelty.
It's like a chilling effect.
Right.
People are afraid to speak their minds for fear of being
canceled
or doxxed or harassed.
And that's what he calls the degradation ceremony.
Right. This idea that blogs have become these modern-day arenas
where people are publicly shamed and humiliated.
Exactly. And it's often done for entertainment.
Right. It's like a blood sport.
Exactly. And the audience is the one who decides who lives and who dies.
And he uses this really interesting example of Julian Assange.
Oh, yeah, the WikiLeaks founder.
Right, and how he went from being hailed as a hero by some to being vilified as a traitor by others.
Right, and a lot of that shift happened online.
Right through these relentless attacks and this kind of character assassination.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you had people on both sides of the political spectrum
who
were participating in this.
So it wasn't even like a left versus right thing?
No, it was more like a
pile on.
Exactly, like everyone just wanted to get their pound of flesh.
Wow, so it's almost like, we're talking about protecting ourselves from being manipulated by fake news.
Right.
But we also have to protect ourselves from being intimidated into silence.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because if we're afraid to speak our minds, then we're essentially censoring ourselves.
Right. And then the only voices that are left are the ones that are the most extreme.
Exactly. And that's not a recipe for a healthy society.
So the question is, what do we do about it?
Right. Because it's easy to feel powerless in the face of all this.
Yeah, because it's like we're up against these massive forces, these powerful algorithms and these,
trolls and bots and...
Yeah, all this stuff.
It's overwhelming.
It is overwhelming. Yeah. So do we just give up?
Well, Holiday's message is not one of despair.
Okay, good.
He believes that we can fight back.
Okay, good. I like to hear that.
But it's not going to be easy.
So it's not going to be easy, but there's hope.
There is.
Okay, good.
Because Holliday's message is ultimately one of empowerment.
Okay.
He believes that we have more power than we realize.
Okay. I like to hear that.
But it starts with taking responsibility.
What do you mean by that?
Well, he argues that we've all become, to some extent, complicit in this system.
Okay. In what way?
Well, we feed the beast, right? With our clicks, our shares,
Right.
our insatiable appetite for the next outrage.
Yeah. It's like that junk food diet.
Exactly. We crave that quick hit of dopamine, even if it's bad for us in the long run.
Right. And so we have to kind of wean ourselves off of that.
Exactly. We need to become more conscious consumers of information.
So it's like being more mindful about what we click on, what we read, what we share.
Precisely. And asking ourselves, why am I clicking on this? Is it because it's actually important, or is it just because it's triggering?
Right. Am I sharing this to inform people, or am I sharing this because I want to, you know,
Get likes or retweets.
or exactly, or start a site, you know, like
Exactly.
what's my motivation here?
And I think that's a really important question to ask ourselves before we hit that share button.
Yeah. It's almost like we need to develop a new kind of digital literacy.
Absolutely.
Like we need to learn how to navigate this online world with more discernment, with more critical thinking.
We can't just be passive consumers of information anymore.
Right.
We have to be active participants.
Mm.
We have to question our sources. We have to seek out diverse perspectives.
Be skeptical.
Exactly. And be wary of anything that seems too good to be true.
Or too bad to be true.
Right? Because often it is.
It's tough though, right?
It is.
Because it's so easy to get caught up in that outrage cycle.
It is.
It's like it's addictive.
It is addictive.
You know, you see something, you get angry, you share it, you get those likes, those retweets, and it's like,
It's like a drug.
it is.
And it's a very powerful drug.
Right.
But like any addiction, it starts with awareness.
Okay.
It starts with recognizing that you have a problem
Right.
and then making a conscious choice to do something different.
So what can we do? How do we actually break this addiction?
Well, I think one important step is to be more intentional with our attention,
Okay.
to really think about where we're focusing our energy.
So it's like a conscious choice.
Exactly. It's about saying, I'm not going to let the algorithms control my media diet.
Right.
I'm going to choose to seek out quality information
Okay.
from sources that I trust.
So it's like voting with our clicks.
Exactly.
Like we're supporting the kind of media that we want to see more of.
And the more of us who do that, the more we can start to shift the balance.
Okay, so that's like a collective effort.
Absolutely.
It's not just on each of us individually, it's on all of us to kind of change our habits and demand better. Exactly. Because the media landscape is a reflection of our collective values. So if we want to see a more truthful, more nuanced, more empathetic media landscape, we have to start by embodying those values ourselves.
Beautifully said. I think that's a perfect way to sum it up.
And that's really what makes Holiday's book so important.
It's a wake-up call.
It is.
It's a challenge, and it's a call to action.
Yeah, it's not just about, you know, pointing fingers and complaining about how bad things are.
Great.
It's about saying, okay, well, what can we do about it? And I think the most empowering message in the book is that we're not powerless.
Or not.
We have a voice. We have agency, and we can make a difference.
Absolutely.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, let's all make a commitment to be more conscious consumers of information, to demand better from our media, and to engage with each other with more empathy and understanding.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well said for joining us on this deep dive into the wild world of online manipulation.
It's been a pleasure.
Remember, knowledge is power, but only if we use it wisely. So stay curious, stay critical, and until next time, stay informed.